when we're talking about peacemaking, we're talking about a proactive movement toward conflict, equipped with tools to heal and to transform, not tools to win or to destroy. We understand peacemaking is actually, it's not passive in any way. I think peacekeeping can be seen as something that is passive, maintaining a status quo, just perpetuates a brokenness that continues to oppress, to occupy, and I think it can lean towards continuing to keep broken systems in place.
Welcome back to The Global Fringe, the podcast elevating leading voices from the fringe, especially women and people of color. This season, we're all about sharing the stories and practices that will lead us all toward wholeness in our body, soul, and spirit. If you find yourself on the fringe of culture, our hope is that this podcast will help you feel like you belong and that your voice is needed in this world. It is time to live and lead with wholeness. It's 2020, in case any of you have fallen asleep and are still in the previous decade. And because it's 2020, it means that we are in an election year and it is coming fast and furious. And I don't feel like I can open up Facebook or turn on the TV or look at Instagram or Twitter to notice how much division is in our world right now. And it feels like it's killing us, which is why I am really excited to have our guest on today. He's an author and the co-founding director of an incredible organization called the Global Immersion Project. And it's a peacemaking training organization that helps people of faith specifically really engage our divided world in ways that are restorative and redemptive and does not just further that divide. So this season, particularly, it feels like an important conversation. But I'm really excited to have Jon Huckins on the show today. Jon, welcome.
Thank you, April. So good to be with you. And I'm grateful to have these conversations because I resonate with everything you just said about the state of our world. So this should be fun.
Yeah. I don't know if it's going to be fun, but let's.
Yeah, maybe not.
Fun in like I'm getting sweaty in my armpits kind of way.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, this is why I asked you, because people can't see you. They'll certainly find you when we do the show notes, but you're a white dude. You live in Southern California, San Diego specifically.
Yep.
And what I love about you is that you are a white dude who is very committed to understanding the privilege and the unfair systemic advantages that you have earned or been given as a white guy. I love how integrated you are in your work and in your life, which I think is a part of the problem in general in our country. And for every post that I see you sharing about the Global Immersion Project and things that you're doing to like bridge the divide between the Israeli and the Palestinian community, or about bridging issues at the border of Mexico and the US, you are also posting about how you are doing that with your kids, with your wife, sharing meals, inviting people into your home, going to marches, holding prayer vigils. There's a very connected, integrated approach to this. And I think that if we are going to actually live and lead with wholeness, that's pretty much a requirement.
Yeah.
So for all of that is why I wanted to have you on this show for such a time as this, and to have you help us figure out, it's because you are a white guy doing this work, how we can join you in that. So with that, I'll kind of transition us a bit to say, one of the things that I really believe is that every leader needs a coach, which works well because I'm a coach. So
there you go.
It's a little self-serving right there.
It is.
But my coach said to me several years ago, actually during the 2016 election, he said to me, April, you can either be a bridge builder or you can be an activist. You can't be both. And I was all like Malcolm X at that moment in time. Like I wanted to be the activist that just burned everything down and called out all of the bullshit and just was in that destructive mode of calling things out as an Enneagram 8. That's so easy for me to do.
You bet.
But in my heart and in like my soul, what I think is more restorative is to be a bridge builder, to take people to places where they may not necessarily want to go, but need to go. Take them from where they are to a more kingdom perspective. And Martin Luther King Jr. was certainly more of that bridge builder. Very different styles, tactics, and even outcomes, if you want to be one or the other. But I wanted to kind of start and ask, as I confess my own stuff there, what's your Enneagram type, and how do you resonate or not with that kind of tension of bridge building versus activist?
Yeah, that's good. I'm a 3, Enneagram 3. So the achiever, producer of things type, which has its positives and has lots of negatives. The shadow is something that certainly can take over a 3, in that we like to look good in front of people. And so when you talk about the idea of building bridges or being an activist, that tension can show up in both ways. It's like, I am going to be an activist because that shows the world that I am standing up and dismantling the broken systems that are breaking people, or I'm going to be a bridge builder because like the source could be, I'm trying to just kind of maintain the status quo, maintain reputation, maintain. And so if I were to approach either out of those spaces, that would be an unhelpful orientation for me as an Enneagram 3. And so this has been an important space for me to really wrestle with, is how is it that I can understand that I have a privilege to either lay down or leverage, which we'll probably talk about later. As an act, like we're going to call out injustice, which maybe we call that activism. But we're going to do it in the economy of relationship, and we're going to do it at the pace of trust, not at the pace of my own ego. And so really, I think that journey from activist to bridge builder, or something in between, I don't know if it's that binary, has been as much about confronting the source of my activism or my maintaining relationship in myself, and confronting ways that my ego inform that, as it has been anything else. But I think it's a really important thing for all of us to consider, because there's no shortage of opinions or ideas in the world and culture right now that just put us in binaries, in opposite camps, and it creates the other, whoever it might be. And oftentimes we other people, we other the community we came out of, because we're hurt and we're filled with shame and cynicism. And that other is just as legitimate other that we need to move towards as our other who might look or think or believe or act differently than we do, or people on the margins. And that's actually a very formational other to be moving towards, I think, especially for those of us who do have an activist bent and come out of traditions we don't agree with anymore. Yeah,
which I think a lot of folks listening are in that camp. There's an easy line to be drawn of like, I am no longer here and I'm with all these other people now, but I'm not going to go back here to what was, because it was so destructive or toxic or unhelpful. And maybe that's something that's worth looking at more. I want to ask you, because in the definition or the mission of the Global Immersion Project, one of the first words is it's a peacemaking organization. Peacemaking, I think, is different from peacekeeping. I think we probably talk about the latter more than the former. And so I'm wondering if you can differentiate and define for us the difference between the two.
Yeah, you bet. When we're talking about peacemaking, we're talking about a proactive movement toward conflict, equipped with tools to heal and to transform, not tools to win or to destroy. So we understand peacemaking is actually, it's not passive in any way. I think peacekeeping, to differentiate, can be seen as something that is passive, that retains a status quo. Sometimes the status quo is a good thing if it's a healthy dynamic. Oftentimes, maintaining a status quo just perpetuates a brokenness that continues to oppress, to occupy. And so I think peacekeeping can be unhelpful. And I think it can lean towards continuing to keep broken systems in place that that are breaking people. And so for us, we see peacemaking as a very proactive movement towards conflict. One way we talk about conflict is that it's not a problem to fix. It's actually an opportunity for transformation. That conflict is, John Paul Lederich would say, it's the most dynamic laboratory for genuine relationship. And if that's the case, conflict is not a problem. The problem is we don't have the ability or the tools to help us navigate conflict well. And peacemakers do that, whether it's interpersonal, whether it's on a neighborhood, local level, or if it's on a systemic level. And that's all of our coaching is. We have 4 core practices of peacemaking built on a restorative theology. And it's focused on how are we moving towards conflict in our relationships, on our streets, and in our world. And so that it's important to say, as a peacemaking training organization, oftentimes our stigma around peacemaking is it's kind of this euphoric unicorn Volkswagen bus 1960s kumbaya thing, and we're like, no, this is actually some of the most subversive, costly work we can do. In fact, I've never experienced more vitriol and hatred directed at me until I began to take the work of peace seriously, because it disrupts peace disrupts a pseudo-peace. Like, our culture has a pseudo-peace that says, oh, don't talk about dismantling racism, or don't talk about reorienting our relationships around truth, or don't talk about international conflicts that we disagree with. Peacemaking means we move towards all that. And so it's very disruptive for the sake of actually moving towards a whole peace.
Yeah. You just said a lot of really good things in there. I think one of the things that I'm frustrated by, the more I become aware of my privilege, is that those who haven't done that work yet, when we bring up divisive issues like race or immigration or LGBTQ rights or women leading in faith spaces, that those with unaware or unprocessed privilege will say, stop being so divisive. Like, let's just let that be. And I don't think that that's a way forward or a helpful thing for us to do. Redemptive work is just ignore that stuff or just shut up. So what would you say around that idea that, like, peacemaking isn't about being quiet or not bringing up divisive issues, but what's the better way forward there?
Totally. That's a great question. Because, and I'm realizing as I said that there's more to be said, because
this is like the water you swim in, John. So, like, take it back to, like, peacemaking for dummies, because you're like at a doctorate level.
Okay, all right. So here's the thing. Peacemaking requires we say hard things, but we have to consider how we say them. For example, just because we know, quote unquote, what is right doesn't mean it's the most helpful thing to shout that from the rooftops, outside of the context of relationship, outside the context of trust, outside the context of a common future together. So, for example, yes, we need to confront the broken systems that are breaking people, and we need to do it with boldness, but we also need to do it creatively. We need to do it collaboratively. We need to do it without shame, without contempt, without hatred. And I think that's the problem. I think a lot of us think we have progressed in all these holy ways, and we become the flip side of what we've left. We become a fundamentalist of the right way, and we're just pointing fingers rather than linking arms and saying, let's go on a journey together. And all of my work in relationships has proven that just simply doesn't work. Pointing fingers and perpetuating that economy of shame. You are not enough unless you think this certain way, or vote this certain way, or act this certain way. All that does is it makes people withdraw, and it puts us into our corners, and it widens the divide. And so how do we move forward as peacemakers who can share and live the truth in ways that are generous and that understand that everyone's on a journey? I mean, if I can't have grace on the people that I was 15 years ago, then who am I to say that I have a redemptive path forward? And so I think that's the cutting edge a lot of times for peacemakers, for activists, is to say, we need to see where we're functioning out of our own pain and hurt. And it's actually, we could be saying the right thing in the wrong way. It's just us barfing out our dysfunction on people. And that's not healing.
That's disgusting. It's actually just gross to barf on other people.
Yeah. I mean, it's a terrible metaphor, but it probably makes the point.
Accurate. Yes. So peacemaking starts with relationship.
Peacemaking starts with relationship. Yeah. I mean, I would say on that, you know, I just was with a group of people that I grew up with, and I intentionally been going back and sharing tables with a lot of these folks to thank them for the ways they've contributed to my journey. And as I've been sitting with them, I've been finding that I don't agree with many, if not most of them, about a lot of things.
Yeah.
But in the economy of relationship, we can actually move forward together. Like, it didn't require me to make sure they agreed on every bullet point for us to move forward in a relationship. And I think it's in that economy of relationship that we can actually move. We define peace as a holistic repair of relationship. So if I'm on a journey toward a holistic repair of relationship between myself and God and my neighbor,
yeah,
I think it is about relationship, and that means proximity, you know. And
yeah.
I really think that proximity is an antidote to our privileged idealism. I think a lot of us in the, if you use the word advocacy world, have a bit of a privileged idealism about the world. And if we're in relationship with people we disagree with, that's going to change and it's going to anchor us. And I think on the other side, there's very complacent people in isolation that think this stuff about the world, but they're not in proximity with the pain or the vulnerable. Yeah. And so they just live a dysfunctional worldview as well. Proximity, in my opinion, cures that. It's the antidote to the privileged idealist and the complacent isolationist, and it grows empathy, and we realize that we're all hurting people. My wife often says to our kiddos, because we've been dealing with kids at school now, we're in the age where, you know,
drama, elementary school, man.
Yeah, like it's icky and hard, but we say to our kids, hurt people, you know, and we're all hurt in some way, and so we're going to hurt each other. But how are we in relationships? We understand that hurt. That grows our empathy and understanding, and it moves us toward wholeness together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really good. I earlier this season, I had Dr. Brenda Salter McNeil on, and we were talking before we hit record about, she just, go back and listen to that episode. If you've already listened to it once, go and listen to it again. Take some notes.
Listening in.
Yeah, get some space when you're done so you can process. She's so freaking wise. And one of the things that I love about how she talks about reconciliation is that it starts with God, because we know that, like, God is the ultimate reconciler and the ultimate restorer. And so we can trust that if we can join God in that process, that new things can come that are holistic, that are reparative, and that are relationally based. And I found myself just kind of stumbling awkwardly as I was recording the episode with her, of one of the things that I love most about who God is that God moved into the neighborhood.
Yep.
Like, made dwelling with us. And I think that proximity piece is so very important. And I can see in my own journey in the last 15 years or so, probably 15 years, that, like, the proximity to people who are different from me has changed everything for me. It has changed how I understand God, myself, the world.
Yes.
And I am grateful that there were people that didn't, like, throw their hands up and be like, oh my gosh, April, you are such a baby, such a privileged, stupid white girl. And were really patient and kind to lead me toward a better way of life. And I just know that proximity piece has changed everything for how I understand all of that. And so that being able to be in relationship, it starts with God, but then it is modeled, it is living and breathing within relationship with each other. And so yeah, I'm excited to see, like, who I become in the next 15 years, because if 15 years ago you would have told me that, like, I believe certain things that I do now, or I'm in relationship with certain people that I am now, like, I would have never believed you, because I didn't have an imagination for that.
Yep.
which is why I love how you guys do this work creatively and collaboratively, because that's, again, I think that's a part of the nature of God. So, okay, so let's dig in a little bit more around the way that these divisions look. You know, you said you've been intentional about going back to people that you now disagree with, that you grew up with. And I think that for a lot of folks that are on some spiritual, deconstruction, Dr. Pete Enns has been another guest this season to help us walk through how do we deconstruct our faith, which is, spoiler alert, it's best done in community. There's a lot of folks listening that are in places like that, or just that are in a different place now than the families that they grew up in, but their families maybe in those places still.
Yep.
So within those closest relationships or within historical relationships, how can we build bridges instead of building walls? Practical, like not theoretical, not like this is awesome theology. Tell us how to do it.
Well, I think that without being too prescriptive, I think it's important because a lot of in those relationships, a lot of us do carry a lot of pain and even trauma.
Yes.
So I don't want to be
that's wise.
presumptive that we've all worked through that and just say, yeah, go back in there. And like, there's a necessary, I think, and we would teach and train this, the peacemaking journey. We actually also believe everything's on a trajectory towards restoration. But it doesn't mean it's going to happen overnight, or that you can even just jump back into that family reunion.
Yeah.
That when you step into that room, you feel the trauma, you feel that cortisol begin to pump into your bones and your anxiety. Like, that's a real thing. And
Absolutely.
So I would say one of the ways that we can build bridges, not walls, is to do our own work, and it's to get therapy, and it's to have a spiritual director, and it's to create space when space is needed, but not to punish our families, but space because we know what we need to become healthy human beings. So I think that's a really tangible piece. I mean, if I'm sitting with people that have done some work on that and they're ready to say, yeah, actually, I want to be back around the table with our family or friends that have hurt us, or church traditions.
Yeah.
Entering into those conversations with some practices like listening longer than feels comfortable, sitting with around that Thanksgiving table or that boardroom and listening longer than feels comfortable. We can feel our heartbeat begin to increase, and we're just frustrated and even disgusted with what some people are saying. Yeah. Listen longer, practice. Where is that coming from? Where is our need to correct them before they end their sentence coming from? Is that from our own issues or our own ego and need to be right?
Yeah.
Or is it with a desire towards healing? It's not that we agree with what they say or we're being complicit in it, but to listen longer than feels comfortable. Another practice is to seek to understand rather than to be understood. That's St. Francis.
Yeah.
How are we asking curious questions rather than just being critical? Like, leading with curiosity rather than critique is one of the most tangible ways, in my opinion, to build bridges rather than to widen the divides. It is hard. We would consider this a spiritual practice. This is spiritual formation. That's why this is a muscle that has to be grown in us and trained, not just inherent in us. Yep. Because we want to be right. We either want to run out of that, the fight or flight thing, like, this is ridiculous, I'm out of here, this is terrifying, or we want to roll up our sleeves and box these people to the floor. And I don't think either of those options is going to build bridges or lead to restoration. And so, we got to do our own work to make sure we can even go in that room. If we want to go in the room, let's listen longer than feels comfortable. Let's seek to understand rather than be understood. And I think one last thing I'll say is, if there's ways to participate together in something that transcends just our ideological divide, that helps us, like, let's make a meal together. Let's participate in a project together. Let's go on a journey. Let's go on an immersive experience together. Let's go down to the border and meet people that break open our worldview and share that transformation together, so it becomes mutual rather than just one of us kind of coming in with a hierarchical view of our perspective on the world.
Yeah. So I said earlier that, I believe that every leader needs a coach, but the bigger picture of that is, I actually really believe that every leader needs a therapist, a spiritual director, and a coach.
Mhm.
Because a therapist helps you work through past stuff, particularly trauma or childhood issues, your family of origin stuff. Spiritual director helps you stay present and to hear where God is at in the moment and notice where God is at work currently.
Yeah.
But then a coach helps you figure out how to move forward and design a future that is in alignment with who you've been created to be.
Mm.
And so I love that you tagged in the spiritual director and therapist, because I just don't know how leaders can lead from wholeness without having the past, present, and future integrated and connected with each other. It just doesn't feel possible, like humanly possible. We need each other. That's part of how like we're supposed to work together.
Mhm.
And I love the curiosity piece. I think that it's become like my favorite quality in a human is people who are curious. They ask questions.
Mhm.
They say, help me understand. They're wondering what's different from their own unique perspective or their life that they've lived. And that does help us to build some bridges moving forward.
Yeah. You know what else about curiosity too is like, it can sometimes be seen as passive or as soft or whatever. But I find that curious people, the reason they're able to be curious is because they live with such a rooted conviction of who they are. You can be when you're like, the other alternative to curiosity is defensiveness. So like, I love especially older folks who I think some people can get old and some people can actually get old and become elders. Not all old people are elders. They haven't gone on this journey to become who they are. And then that leads them to be curious. So like when I sit with an 80-year-old person that still wants to learn and grow and ask good questions, I'm like, where did that come from? And
because they're not threatened.
They're not threatened. Exactly.
Yeah.
You don't have something to defend. You have a future to participate in, and it's just, I think Richard Rohr talks about that, like the difference between becoming old and becoming an elder.
Yeah.
And okay, so who are the elders in my life and how do I learn from them so I build on those characteristics? Anyway, it's a distinctly different posture.
It's so open.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that the people of God, more than any other, need to be open.
Yep.
We don't have to be threatened by anything.
No. And it's not a compromise of our convictions.
No.
Like, we can be convicted and be curious. We can be, we don't have to be assholes. If we actually believe that God is who God says. So anyway.
Yeah. You talk about like, if you want to build a bridge that, going and doing something together, having some sort of shared experience is helpful. And I mean, that's embedded again into the name of who you all are. It's in your identity. It's immersion. And as a coach, I think that immersive experiences are incredibly transformative. I think they're crucial for transformation because we get into like our zones and we've got our blinders on and we run in our lane and we do what we know how to do. But to be immersed into something different and new creates something new. Mm-hmm. So I'm wondering if you can talk about like how that looks within the global immersion, your organization, or how that just works for like everyday ordinary people that may or may not get involved with what it is that you're doing. How does immersion help us transform?
Totally. I'll talk about it on a personal level first, and then some more of the bigger picture after that. I mean,
sure.
For me, I had an experience a decade ago. I was studying in Jerusalem as part of my seminary studies, and we're studying the historical context of Jesus, and it was wonderful. And I'm a bit of a geek on the historical stuff, so I was having a great time. And my wife and I were there together. We were pregnant with our first babe, and so we had to spend the summer there. And one gentleman we connected with at the hotel almost every day, as he's serving our food, and we would have these kind of stumbling through conversations, but there was a bit of a connection. And one day he asked my wife boldly, how far along are you? Which is it's a little risky of a question. And she says, at that time, she was almost 7 months pregnant. And he lights up and he says, my wife is 7 months pregnant as well. And so there was this shift from like consumer product, provider relationship to something that was shared. And one evening we were on top of the hotel together. After he got off work, he'd asked me to hang out, and I'd jump at it. And we're having this conversation about the World Cup and about being parents soon and just normal stuff. And then his cadence begins to slow, and he turns to me. He has a somber look on his face, and he says, "John, why do your people think I'm a terrorist?" He said, "I follow Jesus just like you do. How could you pray for your meals every morning and go look at all these holy sites when 5 minutes away your sisters and brothers in Christ are experiencing daily occupation and oppression?" And he says, I'm a Christian Palestinian who lives in the West Bank, and he points, over the separation wall that's between Israel and Palestine. And it was this moment of just my worldview shattering, my heart breaking, and then disorientation set in. Like, whoa, how could I come here as this good intentioned pastor trying to study the Bible when in reality, I'm complicit in a conflict that's occupying and oppressing not only human beings, but sisters and brothers in Christ.
Yeah.
And just exposed all these blind spots in my theology, in my worldview, in my own practice. The rest of that time over there, we'd finish the class at 5:00 and we'd jump on the public bus, cross through the military checkpoints, and go spend time with this gentleman named Milad and his wife Manar. And what we saw was he was working at our hotel, changing our sheets and serving our food so they could fund a nonprofit in their Bethany, the West Bank town, that taught the children of the village reconciliation, that reconciliation was possible in the midst of violence. And we'd walk to the village and the kids would pour out of their houses and just grab them by their legs because they were a symbol of hope and healing. And so for us, it was for me and us, it was that immersive experience. I wouldn't have even necessarily called it that at the time, but it made me believe there is something transformative when we immerse into contexts that are different than our own. It disorients us in such a way that puts, especially people like me, dominant culture, white, privileged people who live in the U.S. American empire that has Christianity stamped in approving everything that we say and do internationally. It puts us on our heels and says, I have to enter into spaces in the posture of a learner rather than a hero, because when I remain in the posture of a hero, I actually am participating or complicit in violent systems. Milad didn't see me as a symbol of peace, even though I was a pastor Christian from the U.S. He saw me as a symbol of conflict and violence.
Wow.
So that tells us something about how we're showing up in the world. So what if we immerse into our global family, our global village, not as the hero, like our short-term missions, let's build a home in 3 days and convert a bunch of people and write it out in our newsletter afterwards.
Oh, no, you didn't.
But the posture of learners who go and allow those folks to heal our problems so we can go back and do our own work in ourselves, in our churches, in our neighborhoods. And to talk about theologically, I think it creates space for the Spirit to work. Like when we just have control all the time, we can't open ourselves up to what God is doing in unorthodox places and people. I learn about following Jesus from my Muslim and Jewish friends as much as I do from my Christian friends when I immerse into Israel, Palestine. So what do we do with this? Where is the Spirit in that? How does that expand my theology or frustrate me? And why am I frustrated by that, disoriented by that? So it's just a wildly formational experience that I think we would all be wise to participate in.
Wow. That's incredible. Which requires that we probably shift some of our priorities and our resources in order to create opportunities like that. Because to travel, to go someplace that's not like a all-inclusive resort, which I'm a fan of. I've been on them. They're fantastic. But to get into a space that is different, that's going to allow you to be in relationship. That's going to require some shifts.
It is require some shifts. And I think it's important too to say, we have immersion trips to do this, to train in a theology and practice for peacemaking in the context of a actual conflict like Israel-Palestine, or here at the border in Tijuana, where we're meeting with Border Patrol, we're spending the night in migrant shelters. But there's also the opportunity for immersion in our own streets, and I think that's a lot of what we say is, how do we just get more curious, talk about curiosity in our own, what does it mean to go to our local library and study the history of our neighborhood and read old police records? Go to the liquor store and talk to that owner who's been there for 40 years and say, what was the neighborhood like 40 years ago? Have you seen it progress? Help me understand that. Why has it shifted? Where has gentrification been a factor? How does that impact? We can get curious and immerse in our own neighborhoods, our own families, our own relationships with our spouses. We're teaching a methodology and experience through our immersion trips, but it's something hopefully that can translate into every single moment of every day.
one of the mantras that we have at Azar & Co. is your whole story matters. And that matters certainly like in your life, you know, like every moment from conception until this moment matters. There's no part of your story that needs to be severed, divorced, hidden, ignored, minimized. That there can be something redemptive and restorative in every part of your story, and can bring about more good on earth as it is in heaven. But I also am increasingly not just aware, but like I want to do some work around like our whole story matters as a country, you know, in our neighborhoods, in our communities, that when we ignore our American story, that our country was birthed with slavery and kidnapping people from another continent and splitting up and dividing families and enslaving people for hundreds of years, when there's not, again, you need to listen to Dr. Brenda Salter McNeil's or go back to the whole Black History Month episodes, because knowing our story as a country is so important if we are going to move forward and not be divorced or segmented and isolated and just severed from like what actually is true about us. And I think that there's a lot of bridge building work that's done and peacemaking that happens as we own our whole story. Agree?
I totally agree. And I think that like when we have people come to the border here on our immersion trips, many people struggle with the idea of people crossing our border illegally, you know, and ending up in the country as undocumented immigrants. We would say through the process of immersion, to understand the backstory, we have to not just understand the current moment, but what happened in the 1980s when our U.S. policy disrupted Central America and Central Americans fled north and then came here as refugees and then were impoverished and turned to gang violence and were deported back to Central America. And now those gangs are creating the destabilization that's moving people back north again. Like when we find ourselves in the story of brokenness, then it's a process of confession and repentance rather than finger pointing at those people who are coming to get us. And when we can put ourselves into the story, it becomes formational. It becomes discipleship. What is it in my own story that, you know, my parents or my grandparents carried with them that was passed on to me? And it grows empathy, and it grows our ability to see that we have work to do ourselves, not just those people who are screwing up.
Yeah, because we belong together. Like we are brothers and sisters. There is no us versus them. It's just we. And our decisions certainly have consequences. And so there's no decision that I make that is inconsequential for everyone that is directly connected to me or even more broadly than that. So, okay, we gotta start to wrap this sucker up, which makes me sad. But one of the things that you said when we talked about what we would talk about on this episode is you said, hey, I would be totally great with talking about, as a white dude at the peak of privilege, how I have contributed to the patriarchy and, you know, what might be different, or how us white guys can be a part of dismantling and repenting and changing that whole thing. So I'd love for you to I don't even have a question for you. I just would love for you to vamp on that for a second.
Yes. Well, oh man, we have done a lot of damage, and I think that we have a great opportunity as well. You know, as my wife, she's always like 3 or 4 years ahead of me in her spiritual progress, and I try to keep along. But she's someone who always has spent much of the last decade studying feminist theology and practice and history, and has been a primary guide for me in owning my own privilege as a white guy, especially in the church. And so I want to affirm all that she's offered and the grace she's had as I've stumbled forward. But I think for us men, I think there's this something we have to consider first is, why is that oftentimes we get defensive when we use words like white privilege or patriarchy, or ways that males have dominated in so many different ways. We may agree or disagree on that, but when we get defensive, where's that coming from for us? And why is it that we feel like we need to retain control of the narrative And how do we go on a confessional journey to dig out what is at the source of that? Because that's probably our own brokenness that's being projected on others. I think it's important for us to think about how we're raising the next generation. And I'm not just thinking of like strong daughters, but I'm thinking of tender sons.
Yes.
And, there has just been a way we talk about masculinity that's so dysfunctional. And I think we have a beautiful opportunity for me as a white guy, to be unapologetic in how we raise our kids outside of the norms of the predefined characteristics of boys and girls, and liberate our sons to be tender and to be compassionate and generous, and yes, walk with our women towards being courageous and strong, and vice versa. It's not that we don't want all those characteristics in both our daughters and our sons, but I think we have a beautiful opportunity, but it has to come from our modeling too. How am I modeling that with our kids, and paying attention to when I am laying down my privilege and when I am leveraging it like crazy. And, I define privilege. This actually came from Daniel Hill's book, Wide Awake. Privilege is the ability to walk away. Like, what's that stuff in us that we have the ability to walk away from? Our neighbor who's undocumented doesn't have the ability to walk away from the reality that this next election is going to intimately impact her and her 5 kids. I do. I could vote for whoever I want. I'm good. My citizenship's not going anywhere. So how are we helping our kiddos wake up to some of this stuff, especially our white sons who have so much impact in what they inherit, to leverage that or to lay it down? And so I think one other thing I'll say about this, I know time is coming up, is how we talk about the Bible matters, especially as white guys. My wife often says, like, you've been given a platform, whether you deserve it or not, you better use it. And you use it on behalf of us women and those on the underside of power. And I think that's true. I think how we talk about God, not as this male dominant warrior king, but to be able to expand our pronouns about how we talk about God. Like when we say the Lord's Prayer, we always say our Father and Mother. For us, that's not heretical. That's actually expansive and more reflective of a God who transcends any kind of sexual orientation or gender identity. And so how we talk about God, how we talk about women in the Bible, not just the patriarchs, but the matriarchs, how we sing our songs that aren't just celebrating Father Abraham, but Mother Sarah, so I think that we have a responsibility, and it's just about us doing some work. It's just, if we're lazy, we can continue apathetically perpetuating patriarchy in ways that are demeaning and dysfunctional. But if we have some intentionality, we have mentors and guides who are willing to walk with us, like my wife has, and many others with me, we have an opportunity to find our own healing. And it's a great opportunity.
Gosh. Yeah, I think that's what's so hopeful and exciting for me, is that for white men to do the work of dismantling patriarchy and white supremacy, which again, Dr. Brenda Salter McNeil went after both of those in a really beautiful, unique way. It actually promotes healing. It's not like men don't have to fear losing power. It's actually very healing. And I think it's freeing when we do that kind of work. So thank you. Thank you. I love how you talked about all of that. And I would just stand on a chair and cheer and say, thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks for giving us space to talk about it.
Yeah. So I'm wrapping up every episode this season asking guests 3 questions because they're really tightly connected to our mission at Azer & Co. To activate women to live and lead with wholeness and full partnership with men. So these 3 questions are a reflection of that. 60 seconds or less, like your best, quickest response. First question is, how can women be activated toward wholeness in life and leadership?
I would say I think there's lots of ways. I'm going to focus on one again. I'm going to say for us, I'm speaking specifically as a white man, to reconsider the story we've been told about the Bible. And specifically, I think we do need to embrace that God's image is male, female, and more. It's gender full. That I think it was Aristotle that made the argument that women were not made in God's image because it didn't parallel his understanding of the text. And I think we need to we need to reconsider that. And I think that we need to be very clear that Jesus was pro-women in leadership from start to finish. And that is a non-negotiable. So I think both those lead to wholeness and identity for women in the ways that men talk about it and orient to the text, and in regards to leadership as a non-negotiable for the way Jesus saw things shaken down.
I approve this message. That's awesome.
Okay.
All right, second question is, what's the number one practice that leads you toward wholeness?
Silence. Pursuing the gift of anonymity. And that's us three talking. So, because we can often be oriented toward reputation and production. And for me, wholeness has been found in being quiet and listening to others, but also listening to myself and I have to be really proactive. It's like, it sounds simple, silence, but it's, especially as a dad of 4 kids and leading an organization and being a 3, silence has been the pathway towards my wholeness.
Yeah. Last question is, how can men like you use your privilege to partner better with women?
I think we need to not just get out of the way. I think we actually have to proactively participate in dismantling the systems that have created this inequity. So we need to identify what's our part in that. And we all have different parts to play. We have different influence, different platforms. But I don't think it's just about getting out of the way. I think we have to leverage what we've been given to really reshape, dismantle, create something new together with women in collaboration toward a shared future.
Ooh. Well, this was a gift. Thank you. You are, you are doing such good work. It feels more important than ever, more necessary, like palpable, visceral, tactile. We need more of this. So thank you so much for spending time. You said your office is moving. You're in the process of moving today too. So, life is real. Things are bonkers.
No big deal. So good, April. It's an honor.
Thank you, friend. Thanks for listening today, friends. You can listen to previous episodes on our website, azerandco.com/podcast. If you're finding value, please become a patron with the link in the show notes. It costs real dollars and loads of time to produce this podcast, and your dollars make it possible for us to keep doing this work. If you're not already, take a second to subscribe so you won't miss a thing. It also means a ton when you tap your screen to rate, review, and share this podcast with others. All of that allows us to continue sharing voices from the fringe for the betterment of our world. Peace.
Hey friends, do you love podcasts like the one you just listened to? Have you ever dreamed about having your own? Well, my name is Michael and I work for TruthWork Media. We believe that everyone has a story and every story deserves a podcast. Let us help you get started. Look us up at www.truthworkmedia.com, fill out our questionnaire, and I'll schedule a time to talk. It's really that easy. TruthWork Media. Everyone has a story. Yours needs a podcast.